Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Revenue Launch Podcast. I'm your host, Randy Likas, and in today's episode is all about what it takes to build a revenue operating system that leadership trusts. From CRM architecture to forecasting discipline to elevating RevOps into a strategic function within the organization. Joining me today is Aidan Nevin. Aidan is the Vice President of Go-to-Market Operations and Business Intelligence at Fidelity Investments. Aidan started in a highly competitive sales environment at companies like NIF Networks and Dealer Rater, where he consistently ranked in the top 1% before making the pivot from seller to operator. He went on to lead revenue operations at Fidelity Labs, which is Fidelity's internal startup incubator, where he built RevOps from the ground up. In his current role, he sits at the intersection of go-to-market strategy and business intelligence, focused on turning fragmented data into decision-grade insights that drive the business forward. Aidan, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Randy. Happy to be here.
Aidan, I usually like to start these off with maybe just walk us through your career journey. I'd love to learn a little more about how you went from seller into RevOps, how your role has evolved over the past couple of years, and maybe just some of the responsibilities that you have today.
I actually might even go a little further back because I think I realized that I could be successful in sales when I was in college. And I went to the University of Vermont and decided to accelerate my course of study. I ended up graduating in about 2.5 years with my undergraduate degree, which meant I did a lot of selling to my professors that I knew what I was talking about. And I think when I was leaving college, I said, how do I transfer this skill set of getting a lot of stuff done in a quick, short amount of time to a career path, and went into sales as a result of that. So I bounced around between selling anything from cars to nice clothing to eventually landing on tech. And the first company that I joined, DealerRater.com, was an automotive reputation management platform that was operating out of Waltham, Massachusetts at the time, and I could literally walk to the office from where I was living, and I got to cut my teeth and learn tech sales there. From that experience, I really became enamored with joining earlier stage companies, wanted to see what it was like to build companies from the ground floor up, and leverage my skill set of bringing new products to market, selling, and turning that into something interesting. And so I joined a company called the Department of Better Technology for a short period of time, and then eventually landed with NIF Networks, where I was working for 4 years, and joined very early on as one of their first go-to-market hires and helped scale up that company to over 350 associates across 2 different sites, selling into small businesses across the United States. It was there at NIFT that my skill set as a salesperson, I started to transfer that into leading teams, managing teams, coaching, strategy, and ultimately operating go-to-market structures. And it was a great experience. One of those unique things about working inside a startup is the opportunity to put on a ton of hats and see where they take you. And I just acted like a sponge in that environment, tried to pick up as many opportunities as I possibly could. And that led me to Fidelity because while I was not looking for a large enterprise to join as my next thing, I did get reached out to, and they said, we've got this incubator where we start new companies inside Fidelity Investments with the capital and resources that Fidelity has. And we really love somebody to come up and figure out what revenue operations means here. And given my experience with early stage companies, I felt like it was a really great opportunity to kind of test my skill set across not just one new thing, but across a whole portfolio of new things. And so took that opportunity, joined Fidelity Labs about 4.5 years ago as their director of revenue operations, and haven't looked back since.
What was it like when you started 4.5 years ago, and from a system standpoint, and how has your role evolved over the past 4.5 years?
Yeah, so from a systems perspective, the beautiful thing is I joined and there was nothing here. None of the systems were built out. There was no infrastructure. We were on the cusp of launching 2 new products to market. And because of that, they were just starting to think about what this meant from a revenue operations lens. So I had the real fortune of getting to build with a blank slate. And having done building before across 2 previous startup companies, I had an idea of how I wanted to do it this time, and how I thought it could be built to scale successfully within this environment. And so there was a lot of trial and error along the way, but getting to start at zero and understanding the fundamentals of what would ultimately make for a successful go-to-market system at scale meant that I was able to install some of that stuff at a very early stage. Everything from like data governance strategy to data hygiene techniques to audit mechanisms I could install at zero and scale with the go-to-market structure.
You and I were talking a little bit in the green room because I think it's fascinating to work inside of a large traditional business like Fidelity, specifically within the incubator or the startup group. And you mentioned there's a lot of education because RevOps means a little different thing to a legacy Fidelity compared to what you're leading up. And so I'd love to unpack a little bit more what that process looked like and how you had to sort of educate what the differences are and how what you need to do was different than what the legacy organization was doing.
Yeah, as I mentioned to you, revenue operations means something dramatically different inside of a large financial services organization. So my title of a director of revenue operations didn't make sense to a lot of people in the context of what they understood. So I distinctly remember joining, and the first task I was given was explain to people what you do. I was like, okay, I can do that. I remember putting together this big deck that sort of explained RevOps methodology and outlined a mission statement for what a revenue operations team did, and then basically roadshowed it for 6 months. Everybody from internal people inside the incubator to external people who I would need to work alongside, and give them an opportunity to understand what it is we're trying to do here and why it needs to operate a little differently than what they're used to, which ultimately informed them on how to support me. That was the important thing, is that when you're in a large enterprise, you still need to rely on the mechanisms of the enterprise. Everything from procurement, acquiring new vendors, to reporting, financials, etc. You are connected to them. And they need to understand your role, the place that it sits inside the organization, and how to support what I'm trying to get done. So a lot of education, a lot of helping folks understand what it is that we were trying to build, and leverage the relationship building and getting things moving forward in the future.
And what are some of those things that are unique to what it is that you build compared to the legacy Fidelity that's unique? And did you get any pushback on that, or just walk me through sort of because it's a change, it's an internal change.
Yeah.
Right? What did that look like?
Well, number one is there was single ownership of the tech stack, right?
Yeah.
So instead of an enterprise where different teams may own different parts of the tech stack, we owned all of it, which meant that we had a much more integrated and unified strategy to how data flowed from end to end, as well as how the whole thing was architected. We could also move considerably faster as a result of that.
Yep.
But that was foreign, right? Because other teams, other parts of the enterprise, you have to engage with 3, 4, 5 different admins if you want to try to get anything done. So on the one hand, that was a departure that folks weren't super familiar with. The other thing is that we unified support for customer success, marketing, and sales under one umbrella, as well as supporting our finance teams. And all of that centralized to one place, again, a little bit of a foreign concept, right?
Yep.
Having the unified, holistic perspective of buyer journey and go-to-market strategy and system housed inside a single team meant that we thought about things differently than other teams were used to thinking about them. It also meant that we were able to create things that were unique and never before seen in Fidelity. I'll remember distinctly in some of the early days, we built out a marketing attribution model that was bespoke, custom built, and looked at multi-touch, right? And we built a Power BI dash that was powered off of this, and put it out on a roadshow and showed it to some of the other marketing teams, the institutional marketing teams across Fidelity, and they were like, what are we looking at? What is this? How is this possible? Well, it was possible because we owned tech stack, we owned strategy, we owned BI and reporting, so we were able to look at things through a longer lens than just what a single team was responsible for and a single team had control over.
Now, do some of the things that you're doing, are they incubators for the larger legacy organization? Are they taking some of your ideas and some of the things you're doing and trying to do that within sort of the legacy organization as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think you're asking sort of what are we building within Fidelity Labs? We think about our mandate to build sort of two things. One is we look for opportunities where we can leverage perhaps a unique advantage, perhaps some unique IP or opportunity that Fidelity may have, perspective that Fidelity may have, to build a standalone, externally facing and branded startup company. We've done that a number of different times with companies like Safer.ai and Catchlight.ai. On the flip side of that, we will also build businesses that are intended to stay within the Fidelity four walls. Businesses like Fidelity Stock Transfer, Fidelity Private Shares. In both of those cases, and because they carry the Fidelity name, they are designed to stay within and be fully integrated into Fidelity's core business models. Labs has the unique advantage of being able to build both of those things because at their core, they rely on rapid product iteration. They are more akin to tech company products, SaaS products. And so we have the muscles built to not only build and identify the right products, but also drive the go-to-market for those types of things.
Now, does each one of the businesses within Labs have their own unique sales force that sell particular products, or are you building something that the large organization then sort of incorporates and then it's just another product in their bag that they sell?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite parts of my job too, right? Because each of our startup companies operates as its own company. So they have their own sales teams, their own marketing teams, their own customer success functions, their own engineers, designers, data scientists, etc.
Yep.
So there's real startup culture within these individual groups within the incubator. And then inside the incubator is me and my team, which we're the connective tissue. We're the ones that provide that central resource model out to all of the different teams. And what that does for me in my day-to-day is it keeps it incredibly stimulating. The constant context switching from this business concept to this business concept and this sales team to this sales team, this pipeline and this one over here is really stimulating. It's really challenging, but it also forces you to grow at a pretty exponential rate and learn at a pretty exponential rate. And the problem solving of building a go-to-market system that's flexible at scale across all those different business concepts is entirely different than building one that's bespoke for a single team, company, and product.
So let's unpack that a little bit because that's fascinating. So what, if I'm hearing you correctly, there's like a bit of a shared services organization for the different teams where you probably centralize different operating cadences that run the business, sort of key rituals or inspection points that are consistent.
Yep.
But it's got to be flexible enough to incorporate the unique cadence of the business. So what, I guess the question is like, what stays centralized and maybe some examples, and what are some of the things that are like nuanced for the particular business?
Yeah, so when we think about like the core revenue system has to be centralized, right? Because on one hand, you have a customer who signs a contract to buy a thing, and on the other hand, you have money that goes into a bank account that needs to be accounted to the right business. And so that end-to-end flow has to all talk and sound similar, right? So that's all the way down to like field level names have to be identical so that we can understand everything in the same way and we can leverage the same workflows, the same BI tools, the same reporting mechanisms to draw all this information out and not have to like translate it from system to system. So that's a good example of one of the areas of opportunity that we look for. Another good example is like on the enrichment side. We look for opportunities to centralize enrichment so that we're not enriching contact or account level data more than once. We have a unique advantage of being able to do that. So if a contact exists as a potential prospect or lead across multiple business lines, I don't want to be paying to enrich that data more than one time.
Yep.
And in order to make that possible, the actual metadata that exists on the contact or account level has to also be unified and the same, right? So even if one team wants to call something slightly different, we won't allow it at the field level because we need it to all look and talk identical. And then the last example that I give to you on the business intelligence side is that when we go and stand up individual portfolio level reporting, we want that to look like it speaks the business's language. However the business talks about its core KPIs, however it measures success, we want the actual data visualization layer to look, read, and feel like however the business talks about itself.
Yep.
But underneath it, because we also need to aggregate all of the portfolio level data together, it all has to be the same again, right? So all of the workflows, all of the data validation steps, everything has to still say the same thing underneath the top layer so that we can aggregate and we can do this. And the last piece is that all of this is built with the idea of repeatability at scale, because when I go stand up 3 new businesses next year, I can just copy, paste, repeat over my infrastructure, and my next company starts at not day 0, but day 365.
Yep. Wow. The complexity of this just sounds, it's fascinating because you think about, you have to have the data governance models that work underneath, that works across the businesses. But I mean, from a reporting and dashboard, it has to be flexible enough to meet each individual needs of the business. If you think about like CRM as a single source of truth, how much of this is done within your CRM versus maybe a data warehouse, or you mentioned Power BI? Like, how do you think about bringing these together under one data governance model, and how much lives in CRM versus has to live in other places, yet still be able to unify and talk back into the CRM?
So I think about CRM as sort of having two functions, right? Like surface level, a CRM is a way for me to navigate and surface the data that I need to surface for whatever reason I have, right? I want to call somebody, I need to know what the data is that allow me to call them. If I want to know what the business's interactions are, I need to be able to go see like activity feeds. I need to read the data, right? That's like the CRM function 1. But CRM function 2 is actually as a warehouse, right?
Yeah.
A CRM is a data warehouse at its core. And if you think about it and structure it that way, then you create data that's very usable. And a lot of modern CRM tools have really great workflow and automation functionality built and embedded into them now, so that you can install things like data governance or data validation steps along the way that help keep it clean. So our first step is structuring the CRM to be this like really tight box. I always say to my team, start as restrictive as you possibly think we should get here, and then we'll open it up from there. And at some points in time, our go-to-market partners may say, hey, it's not doing what I want it to do, or I'm not able to quite manipulate it the way I want to. And I usually say, good. That's the point.
Yeah.
But what it does is it allows us to accomplish what you just described, which is have this really scalable, flexible, repeatable mechanism. And then from there, we don't have to do quite as much manipulation of the data when it gets into our warehouse, because we've already structured it really cleanly.
Yeah.
So when it gets into our warehouse, it sits in this really nice, pretty box that then we can flow into our data visualization tools. And we don't have much of a challenge getting to data visualization because, again, clean data at the core turns into really nice information about the business at the top.
Yeah.
And we're not manipulating along the way. There's a lot of failure points if you manipulate along the way. We try to control it at the base, at the CRM level, but by treating CRM as warehouse to do.
And just if we could double click that for a moment, because there's so many problems with when you have multiple tools across a revenue stack that have their own data schemas writing inside of Salesforce, maybe cross objects or duplications or what it might be. So how do you ensure that data cleanliness? Are you doing it at the source? Or did you build a process or a system to sort of clean it downstream and then write it back? I'd love to just spend a little bit of time in terms of how you do that.
Yeah, we have an air traffic controller that we've built inside our CRM that basically takes any new information and cleans it. Goes through a bunch of rigorous steps to make sure that everything's done the right way. Everything from attribution, scoring, metadata enrichment, like everything's being done in the step and order that we need it to be done, so that by the time it actually sits inside the CRM as record, it's clean.
Yeah.
And then we have audit systems running against the CRM, looking for disparity within it, because you also have manual manipulation that can then make your CRM not clean anymore, right? So we know where to look for the mismatches or where to look for the manipulation, and we've built systems of notification and alert that will tell us on a pretty regular basis, hey, this piece is out of whack, hey, this piece is out of whack. That means that I akin it to like trying to get my kids to clean their bedroom, because if you just wait till like the end of a month to go tell them to clean their room, there's toys everywhere, everything's a giant mess.
Right.
And it seems this daunting task that you can't get after, versus telling them every night before they go to bed, can you pick up the 3 things off your floor? Because right now, easy task. But by the end of the week, by the end of the month, this is going to feel like the worst thing you've ever been asked to do.
Yep. It's a great analogy, and one that I live every day with my kids. So how does this then break down to double click on part of the conversation when you talk about the different dashboards that are flexible enough for the business, and what are the common metrics that you can have for forecasting and the operational cadence that you set.
Mhm.
Can you walk me through like how that is done, or is that sort of solved because you've taken such care at the ingestion point and make sure it's clean at the beginning? Does that make it easier later on to apply the right filters for the right reporting? Walk me through that a little bit more because I'm fascinated about that.
Yeah, it does make it easier, right? I mean, we have like data dictionaries, definitions built out. We have our data map that tells you this field connects to this field, and this is how it's defined, and this is how it's structured, and this is where it goes, and this is the validation step on it. Here's the notification. Like, we've spent a lot of time and care in documenting this stuff so that, one, if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, the system still runs and somebody can understand it. But two, it allows us to debug things very, very quickly. And at the surface level, when you get to the point of showing off this data, be able to connect to the person who needs to read it. What is the definition of this data? Where is it coming from? Those questions get answered instead of that like level of untrust that sometimes you get where it's, I don't know where that's coming from. I can tell you. I can tell you how we're defining this. I can tell you the formula. And by the way, all of that stuff's consistent across all of the portfolio companies. So when you talk to each other, we're all in the same incubator. If go-to-market leader A wants to talk to go-to-market leader B, and they're talking about a metric, the metric's calculated the same way.
Yeah.
The data system's the same. So they can have much more impressive conversations about the strategy that's involved in making that metric good or bad or understanding it, and less on how did you get there and why is it what it is.
What was the hardest part of building that data layer, or what's the one area that you haven't quite cracked the code on that you still need to figure out? I'm just curious because you're much farther advanced than a lot of folks that I speak to, and I think it's fascinating how you figured this out. But is there one that still is like the thorn in the side that you're trying to crack from a data source standpoint or disparate system standpoint that you're trying to align on, or that still is something you wrestle with day to day?
That's a really good question. And I'll give you, I think I heard two questions. I'll try to answer a little bit of the first one and then the second one. The first one, like the thing that's kind of surprised me the most about building this is that it's taken a long time. When you're in a startup and you're running at warp speed and you're trying to hit your targets, I mean, it's been 4.5 years of building this. What a unique opportunity to have thought on a 4-year time horizon when we set out to build this thing and not on a 6-month time horizon because the money runs out. Right? So I also want to recognize like there's a decent amount of privilege in the environment that I'm in that's allowed me to be very methodical about the approach. But also that's why I took the opportunity, because I knew I could do it that way. Yeah. And I wanted to see what was possible if you had a few years runway to build out like the absolute Ferrari of revenue operations machines, right?
Yep.
That's not possible for everybody. Most other folks that are trying to do this on their own, either as an individual contributor or in different environments, building as you go, building as quickly as you can, and probably having to start over every 2 or 3 years, but more often than not, right? Mm-hmm. And there's not a ton of transfer of like, well, I know I built this thing last time, but you can't exactly lift it out and rebuild it again, right? You can try to remember it, but it's hard. So that's one thing that I'll just mention there. What was your other question?
The second part of the question was what continues to be that thorn in the side?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say that it's two things. One, there are ghosts in the system. I'm convinced of it. I don't know where they come from. I don't know why these records get duplicated. I don't know why some of them randomly get deleted half the time. But there are ghosts in there, and they're just there to mess with me. So I'm not entirely sure that's solvable, but it is true, and you won't convince me otherwise. Second is like there's a transfer of knowledge issue when you have a larger team that's working within the same system, which is to say that the emphasis on good communication becomes greater, because if you've got 2, 3, 4 individuals completely capable of doing the same task, they shouldn't all do it. 1 or 2 of them should end up doing it. But how do you then transfer out of that work what happened, why it happened, and how that translates to whatever the next thing is to take place? Yep. So the challenge that I'm highlighting is that you have to really rethink and engage in what your project management strategy is, and you have to think about how you're communicating iteration in the system so that you don't have changes made by person A over here to solve this problem impact the thing that this person's working on over here. And that because we have so many moving parts at this point in time, the maturity of the system's so great, that's what sometimes causes breakdowns, right?
Yep.
Like I didn't realize when I made this change that it also plugged into this thing over here that then broke this system over here.
Yeah.
That we have to create governance in even like the process of changing things, right?
Yeah, because there's probably some things that you're building that you've got legacy tech debt or logic debt or whatever it might be that as the businesses evolve that you have to be aware of, right? And that kind of leads me to my next question, which is like the opportunity that you see using AI specifically in the RevOps function, not necessarily to help make the reps more productive, but using AI in the RevOps line of things. How are you thinking about the opportunities there?
I think what we're thinking about is how can we put AI in the hands of our end users so that they can ask questions of the system and not of us. That's like opportunity number one, right? Like, how much can I get in front of the pings on Teams or Slack, the daily nudges, the questions, and give them access to something that understands the system or where things are in the system well enough that it then frees me up and my team up to go do the work we want to be doing. Because if you allow that open door, which by the way, like you should as a good partner, but it can also take up 40-50% of your time before you realize it. And half the time it's questions that could have easily been answered, right? So the biggest opportunity space for me is, hey, is there a way to self-serve some of the asking, the questions that help us out? And you can plug that into all of your RevOps documentation, into your CRM, and it can understand all your workflows, it can understand where everything lives, so that it can answer those questions to your go-to-market leaders and your end users in a way that's more time productive than the messages that go to the team directly and then take time from their day to answer versus doing the work to improve the system.
Yep. And I think what you're leading to is something that we often hear a struggle, which is we are inundated with so many requests that we are both a support organization, which we need to be, right? But we also want to be able to free ourselves from being strategic and being able to operate at the board level and in more sense. So from here, what you're saying is like that you see the opportunity of AI as being able to still provide the support that's needed, but do it in a self-serve function which would free up your team to be able to focus on some of the more meatier strategic issues. Am I paraphrasing correct?
Yeah. And you sort of lead me to like one of the other topics that I've talked about a lot, which is elevating RevOps as a strategic function from that like support model, right?
Yeah.
And one of the strategies that I really like is I like teaching my team how to say no because they're really bad at it, which is a great trait for a team to have. They love to say yes, and they're incredibly capable, which means that they get asked more things because they know that the answer will be yes, and they will solve the problem, right?
Yep.
It turns out that no is a really powerful thing because no challenges priority, no challenges some self-sufficiency in thinking. And it's not that you actually want to just say no to everybody, but it's more that there are ways you can ask the question back to the go-to-market leader or to the function to say, this sounds like important work to you, but where does it fall alongside the other priorities that we're working on? Help me understand what moves the needle for you the fastest. Like that question alone helps align you to them and asks, is this a need to have or a nice to have?
Yeah.
Is this I have to jump on this right now and drop everything I'm doing, or can it wait? And if it can wait, are there other ways we can still make sure that you get the answers that you need, which is where something like AI can be really helpful.
Yeah.
But I also use this strategy in training new reps because new reps will tend to go to you a lot and they will want to ask you a lot of questions. And 9 times out of 10, they know the answer to the question. They just want validation. So I've also taught my team to not answer. And not that they don't answer ever, but give it a beat because we also have access to instant messaging, which means that responses are expected relatively instantaneously. And we can get into the habit of providing that as a service or a support mechanism, right?
Yep.
So the next time somebody comes to you, like, why don't you just leave the message alone for an hour? And when you go back to that message, instead of saying, hey, let me solve this for you, ask them if they still need a hand solving it, right? Because one of two things is going to happen. They're either going to say, absolutely, I definitely need help, in which case, help them. Or they're going to say, oh no, I actually figured that out while you were gone. I needed the answer and I got the answer. Amazing. Like now you've sort of like led the horse to water.
Well, yeah, and sometimes I think it's a really interesting point, because sometimes the waiting on the response, if they've done anything since they've submitted the question for you, it helps you measure how important is this really to them, right? Is it just something that they were too, quote unquote, lazy to do?
Correct.
Or if you've gone back to them and said, hey, is this still something you're working on? And they're like, yes, and here's what I've done since my last request. It helps
Correct.
you look get inside of their heads in terms of how important is this to you, right? Not just the request itself. Why did you submit this, and what are you trying to achieve, and what have you
Correct.
done in the process? I think it's really interesting.
There's a human psychology element too, because by framing the question of, hey, do you still need a hand with this? It implies that they will have done something about it.
Yeah.
Which, whether or not they have or not, they will subconsciously retain that the expectation is they have next time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Last question before we wrap it up into the lightning round here. Over the past 4.5 years, you've done a lot of different things. Anything you do differently, or hindsight being 2020, what you would do to either learn from your mistakes or changes that have been made that didn't have as much of an impact? If you had the benefit of hindsight, what would you change?
Yeah, and there were definitely a few instances where we over-indexed to the need of one team. And this is a unique thing to like working inside the incubator, right? One team was really shouting about something that they needed to be built as a functionality. And we could see how maybe that functionality would support everyone, but didn't really do enough due diligence to really understand if it was a universal need or if it was a niche need, and over-indexed resources, time, and money to solving that one problem. And I think what that really led me to is we're the experts. Like the team, they're going to want a lot of stuff, but when it comes to the go-to-market system, the go-to-market strategy, the go-to-market operations, we're the experts.
Yep.
And they should rely on us to understand what that good looks like. And so those were mistakes that were made early on, over-indexing to the needs of an individual team, to niche needs, or to like loud, shiny things, and not staying true to our strategy, what we knew was going to move the needle the quickest, and things that would support the entire incubator and not just individual teams. You know, my mandate is twofold. I need to make my company successful, but I also need to make the incubator successful. So we think about this mantra, rising tide lifts all ships, right? Like that has to be the thought process with which we deploy our resource and capacity to building here.
And I should have asked you at the top of the call, how big is your team?
I think I had 11 people on my call this morning.
Oh, wow. Yeah, good size.
Yeah, it's a good sized team, but we're supporting 9 different companies right now on an average of 1.1 per team. So
Good size, but when you put it in the context of how many businesses you're supporting, it's those 1.2 people are supporting a lot of questions and providing a lot of support.
True. Now, having said that, this team I've been building with for a long time. We're not starting at zero, even with the new businesses.
Yeah.
This team is working on really complex, challenging things every single day, and we are continuing to build on top of the foundation that we've already built. So it's exciting. We're not starting over.
Yeah. So let's move to the lightning round. I've got a couple questions for you that are just a little more thought-provoking, a little top of the head type of thing. And I don't want you to disclose anything that's proprietary in nature, so feel free to punt this question if you can't think of it. But time, money, and resources weren't an issue, right? What would you do that maybe you're limited to do today because of those reasons?
Professionally or personally?
Both, actually.
Personally, I'd travel.
Where would you go?
I'd love to just travel the world. Italy, I think, would be my first stop. Yeah.
Where have you gone that's been your favorite place to visit?
I love Barcelona.
Yeah, I've heard great things.
Yeah.
I've never been, but heard great things.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Okay, what about professionally?
Professionally, time, money, and resources, not a problem.
Not a problem.
I mean, I would love to be a founder. I'd love to start a company.
Yeah.
And if I could have unlimited money, time, and resources, I think I could do it.
Do you know what area that you would start something? Have you thought about that?
No, I like to say I am a phenomenal operator of a business. I'm not a great comer-upper of businesses, so I need the idea person if you know anybody.
Yep, I know a lot of people like that they're like, I can build, right? But I'll let somebody else come up with a vision.
You give me the thing, I will turn it into money.
Yeah.
I'm not great at coming up with the thing.
What about the favorite part of your job?
I love the constant stimulation. Like moving from not just like problem to problem, department to department, but also company to company. It's such a wide variety of content and context in a day. That keeps me stimulated and motivated on a daily basis.
Yeah. There's always going to be a flip side to that question, which is least favorite, or sometimes I ask the question a little bit differently. What's really hard about your job?
There are so many people that rely on the function that the hardest thing is appropriately prioritizing the work. You think about it, if you're a sole revenue operations army of one in a company, you've got a couple stakeholders, and maybe at times each of them has something on fire or something pressing that is the most important thing to them. Now, multiply that by 10, right? Mm-hmm. Because not only do I have 10 companies that all have their own most pressing thing to work on, but within that I have each department within those companies that each has their own most pressing thing to work on. So it is incredibly challenging to not just negotiate and understand priority, but then be able to communicate priority effectively, because you don't want anybody to feel like they're not getting the attention, care, or service that they need.
Yep.
That's communication that is on another level that is challenging to keep up with.
Yep. What's the one thing you learned as like a bag carrying rep early in your career that has stuck with you today and has helped create your ethos in terms of how you run revenue operations?
That's a really good question. When I was selling, and I would bet you money that almost every sales rep I've trained over the last 4.5, 5 years has heard me say this, I really built around this concept of trust as the key to selling. And how do you build trust between you and the buyer, you and the buying team, the buying committee, in a way that is authentic to you? Not everybody can build trust in the same way. And I think that to me, understanding in myself how I could establish and relay trust was critical in understanding how to meet the needs of my buyers and to ultimately be successful. I think you can translate that into revenue operations, because you can think to yourself, in what ways am I helping my company build trust with its customers and its buyers along their journey?
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. And that's one thing I think that people are thinking about, what's AI going to replace? And you're never going to be able to replace that human element of being able to build trust with somebody over the course of a life cycle of a deal.
I could not agree more with you. It's one of my big issues right now with AI is the number of emails I get that reference silly things on my LinkedIn profile that are clearly just shots in the dark.
Yeah. So you probably get, I would say, hundreds of people prospecting you every single day. What stands out? What would make you reply to someone?
What would make me to reply to somebody?
Yeah.
I will tell you that the number one mistake is that people don't take the time to actually understand the role and the context of where I'm at. It's very unique and it's very obvious when you haven't researched it.
Yeah. So bespoke, researched, probably, I think, if they understand your role, they understand the problems that you anticipate, right? So something that's just not cookie cutter and something that you go, this person's got to put in some time, you may give them a response.
Yeah, I can usually tell when somebody's actually done the research versus was prompting something.
Yeah. 2 more questions for you. One is, what's easier, to change rep behavior or redesign a process or system?
Oh, that's a good question. Change rep behavior. I find changing rep behavior to be incredibly simple, to be honest with you.
Really? Tell me more. How do you do that?
I think that reps behave in a way that they're incentivized to behave. And reps behave in a way that is visible to them. And so I find that you can change rep behavior by aligning incentive with the things you want to have happen and by creating visibility and accountability to when it's not happening. And I think that one is giving them incentive and making them feel good about it, and one is sort of this like punitive, I'm going to shine a light where the light isn't shining. But you don't do it in that lens. You do it more of like a visibility layer. We're paying attention to this now, and I'm not saying what good or bad looks like, but I'm just pointing out how you are in it, and then allow the rep to like self-diagnose for themselves how they're performing against the expectation, which usually is a pretty good way of incentivizing them. And then on the flip side of it, if you can attach it to some sort of incentive or good outcome, it tends to be pretty easy to change rep behavior. So I find that's not terribly hard, so I'm going to say it's harder to change system and process.
All right, last question. What do you do in your free time? Like if you want to unpack and kind of get away and just decompress, what do you like to do?
Well, I've got 3 kids. Most of my free time goes to occupying them, and that can be anything from coaching basketball to coaching soccer to taking them on hikes around New England. A lot of time dedicated to spending time with them. Personally, I also like to get out and still play basketball when I can. Yeah, it's a lot of kids these days, Randy.
Yeah, I've got 2 of my own, 7 and 4, and yeah, it's like free time. What do you mean free time? Everything's usually centered around the kids' agenda and what they've got going on. You mentioned basketball. I've got to ask you, who do you like that's left in the tournament so far? Who's going to win?
Well, my pick for the champion got knocked out with that buzzer beater by UConn. So
That's incredible.
unfortunately, Duke's not going all the way. So I'm going to have to ride with Michigan.
Michigan, yeah, I think it's a good pick. I watched them yesterday. They look really tough. Of course, I'm in Chicago, so I would love to see Illinois, but I think they're the weakest of the teams remaining. So.
You said it, not me.
All right, well, listen, Aidan, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate you sharing your insights and thoughts with us. Appreciate every minute of it. So that is another episode of the Revenue Lounge. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Have a great day.
Thank you.